Approval seeking rarely looks like weakness. It disguises itself as politeness, humility, cooperation, or kindness. It tells you that wanting others to like you is normal, even virtuous. But beneath that surface lives a psychological chain most people never see until it has already shaped their behavior, their voice, and their boundaries. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Approval seeking is not humility. It is submission dressed up as social virtue. From a very early age, humans are conditioned to equate approval with safety. When you are a child, approval means protection, food, guidance, and belonging. Disapproval feels dangerous because it threatens exclusion. The nervous system learns quickly: fit in, comply, adjust, be liked. That lesson becomes deeply embedded long before conscious thought develops. As adults, the environment changes, but the wiring remains. Approval no longer determines survival, yet the body still reacts as if it does. This is why people soften their opinions, explain themselves unnecessarily, tolerate disrespect, or suppress instinctive boundaries. Not because they are weak-minded, but because their nervous system still believes approval equals safety. This is where the chain forms. The hidden cost of needing validation is the loss of internal authority. The moment your emotional stability depends on someone else's reaction, you have surrendered the steering wheel. You may still appear confident. You may still sound intelligent. But internally, your center has shifted outward, and power always follows the center. Approval seeking leaks emotional control in subtle but devastating ways. When you want to be liked, you monitor faces, you read tones, you adjust posture, timing, and language to keep the emotional environment favorable. This constant adjustment signals something important to the people around you, even if they can't articulate it. It signals need. Humans are extraordinarily sensitive to emotional needs, not because they are cruel, but because the nervous system is designed to detect hierarchy quickly. When one person seeks approval and another grants it, the hierarchy is set. One adjusts, the other evaluates. This is why approval hunger is sensed instantly. You don't need to announce it. It shows hesitation, in over-agreeing, in explaining yourself before anyone asked, in apologizing for existing, in softening statements to avoid discomfort, in reacting quickly to preserve harmony. None of this requires words. The body broadcasts it. And once approval seeking is detected, behavior around you changes. People feel comfortable testing you. They feel entitled to your flexibility. They expect explanation, reassurance, and emotional availability. Not consciously, automatically, approval seeking turns relationships into evaluations. Every interaction becomes a quiet audition. You may not feel it happening, but the other person does. They sense that you are measuring yourself through their response. That is the invisible chain. The most damaging part is that approval seeking feels active. It feels like effort, like care, like moral behavior. But psychologically, it is reactive. You are not choosing from inner alignment. You are responding to external signals. This is why approval seeking drains authority. Authority is the capacity to remain internally stable, regardless of external reaction. Approval seeking does the opposite. It hands emotional veto power to whoever happens to be present. Whoever frowns, withdraws, praises, or approves becomes your regulator. And regulators are never equals. Before we start, tap like and hit subscribe. Because approval seeking isn't kindness. It's outsourcing your authority to whoever reacts to you. And the moment your stability depends on their response, you've already handed them the higher position. This is why people who seek approval are rarely respected long-term, even when they are liked. Liking is emotional warmth. Respect is structural. Respect requires boundaries, self-command, and emotional independence. Approval seeking erodes all three. The moment you need approval, you stop being self-anchored. Self-anchoring means your sense of worth, timing, and response is determined internally. Approval seeking replaces that anchor with feedback. The internal question shifts from "what do I believe?" to "how is this landing?" That shift is small, but everything changes after it. This is the identity activation point. You move from being validation-driven to self-anchored, from adjusting to being grounded, from needing permission to exist to assuming your place without asking. This does not mean becoming hostile, arrogant, or indifferent. It means removing emotional dependence from social interaction. You can still be kind. You can still listen. You can still cooperate. But you no longer collapse when approval is withheld. And when approval no longer governs you, something profound happens. Your posture changes. Your pacing slows. Your words become fewer and heavier. Your reactions become deliberate instead of reflexive. People feel this shift immediately because the governing law has activated. The one who needs approval gives power to the one who grants it. The moment you stop seeking approval, you begin reclaiming that power, not by taking it from others, but by anchoring it where it belongs. Inside. Approval seeking does not invite kindness. It invites evaluation. The moment you begin looking outward for validation, you unconsciously place the other person in a higher position, not because they demanded it, but because you offered it. And once that position is established, the relationship quietly shifts from equal to hierarchical. This is how approval seeking trains disrespect. When you seek approval, you are no longer speaking from yourself. You are speaking to be received. That subtle shift changes the entire psychological frame. The other person is no longer meeting you as an equal participant. They are assessing you, judging you, deciding how much space you deserve, and humans are very sensitive to this dynamic. The judge's position feels powerful. Even well-meaning people feel it. When someone is seeking approval, others instinctively feel permitted to correct, guide, interrupt, or test. Not because they dislike you, but because the structure of the interaction invites it. This is why approval seeking always places others above you. You may still be intelligent, you may still be competent, but the emotional hierarchy has already been set. One person adjusts, the other evaluates. And wherever evaluation exists, respect weakens. This is why people test those who seek permission to exist. Testing is rarely overt. It shows up as small interruptions, dismissive jokes, subtle boundary pushes, delayed responses, or casual disrespect. These are not attacks. They are probes. The subconscious question behind them is simple. Will this person hold their ground or bend? Approval seekers almost always bend. They over-agree to preserve harmony. They over-explain to justify themselves. They over-apologize to smooth discomfort. Each of these behaviors feels polite at the moment, but psychologically they send a clear message. I am adjustable. And adjustable people are managed, not respected. Over-agreeing erodes authority because it signals the absence of an internal position. When you agree too quickly, especially on matters that affect you, you communicate that your stance is flexible under pressure. Others stop taking your words seriously because they assume they can be revised later. Over-explaining erodes authority because it frames your position as debatable. Explanation invites discussion. Discussion invites negotiation. Negotiation invites challenges. What began as clarity ends as self-defense. And defending yourself lowers your rank automatically. Over-apologizing erodes authority because it trains people to associate your presence with inconvenience. Even when nothing wrong occurred, repeated apologies communicate that you feel responsible for maintaining others' emotional comfort. This creates entitlement. People begin expecting your compliance. None of this happens overnight. It accumulates. Approval seeking slowly shifts the relationship from equal to subordinate, without a single argument or confrontation. You don't notice it because it feels cooperative, but others feel it because they no longer need to self-regulate around you. This is the critical point. Respect requires restraint. People respect those who can tolerate disapproval without collapsing. Approval seekers cannot. Disapproval feels dangerous to them because their nervous system still equates it with rejection or exclusion. So they rush to repair, soothe, explain, or comply. That rush is the giveaway. When someone sees that you cannot tolerate disapproval, they learn that pressure works. Once pressure works, it is repeated, and repetition trains behavior on both sides. This is why approval seekers are rarely confronted directly. They are subtly managed instead. Given tasks others avoid, interrupted without apology, asked for flexibility without reciprocity, expected to adapt without complaint. Not because they are weak, but because they are available. This is where the hierarchy becomes permanent, unless interrupted. The affirmation block here is not about confidence. It is about nervous system retraining. You must learn to tolerate the discomfort of disapproval without self-betrayal. That means not rushing to clarify, not softening truth to preserve comfort, not apologizing for existing, not filling silence to regain approval. Disapproval is not dangerous. It is information. And when you stop treating it like a threat, others stop using it as leverage. This does not mean becoming rude, cold, or dismissive. It means remaining grounded when approval is withheld. You can listen without agreeing. You can speak without defending. You can disagree without hostility. The moment you stop chasing approval, people recalibrate. Some will resist. Some will test harder. Some will withdraw. And some will respect you for the first time. Because the structure of the relationship has changed. You are no longer auditioning. You are no longer adjusting to be accepted. You are no longer placing others in the judge position. You are standing where you are. And this activates the governing psychological law of this stage. Approval seeking turns relationships into hierarchies. When you stop seeking approval, the hierarchy dissolves or reverses, not through dominance, not through confrontation, but through internal anchoring. Disrespect does not survive long in the presence of someone who does not need permission to exist. The real transformation does not begin in how others treat you. It begins inside your nervous system. This is the part most people never understand, because approval seeking feels psychological, social, even moral. But at its core, it is biological. It lives in the body long before it reaches the mind. When approval is no longer required, the first thing that changes is not confidence. It is pressure. Approval seeking creates constant internal tension. A low-level anxiety hums beneath every interaction. Am I being liked? Did I say the wrong thing? How are they reacting? Should I clarify? Should I soften this? That tension is not emotional. It is neurological. The nervous system stays on alert, scanning for signs of acceptance or rejection. The moment approval stops being necessary, that scan shuts off. Nothing dramatic happens at first. There is no rush of empowerment. What happens instead is silence. Internally. A quiet where there used to be noise. The body stops bracing. The shoulders drop. The breath slows. The compulsion to adjust, explain, or perform dissolves. This is the collapse of emotional pressure. When validation is no longer the goal, the nervous system exits survival mode. It no longer treats social interaction as a threat environment. You are no longer trying to secure safety through approval. Safety becomes internal. And when safety becomes internal, anxiety loses its function. This is why calm replaces anxiety so quickly once self-worth becomes internal. Calm is not confidence. Calm is regulation. A regulated nervous system does not rush. It does not overreact. It does not leak urgency. It does not seek reassurance. It moves slower, not because it is unsure, but because it does not need to be anywhere else emotionally. This internal shift changes everything about how you show up. Your posture changes without effort. You stand differently because you are no longer leaning toward acceptance. Your tone changes because you are no longer cushioning your words to avoid rejection. Your timing changes because you are no longer afraid of silence or delay. Non-neediness alters behavior at a level others feel immediately. People often mistake this for confidence, but confidence can be performed. Non-neediness cannot. It emerges naturally when your nervous system stops outsourcing stability to external approval. This is why approval and alignment are not the same thing. Approval is external validation. Alignment is internal congruence. When you seek approval, you are constantly negotiating yourself. You adjust values, tone, pace, and boundaries to remain accepted. When you operate from alignment, you move from a fixed internal position. You may still adapt tactically, but you do not bend psychologically. Alignment feels solid. Approval-seeking feels flexible. And flexibility under pressure is read as weakness. This is the moment the identity transition occurs, from externally regulated to internally governed. Externally regulated people take emotional cues from the room. If the room tightens, they soften. If the room disapproves, they retreat. If the room praises, they lean in. Their behavior is shaped by feedback loops they do not control. Internally governed people do the opposite. The room adjusts to them. They do not ignore feedback. They simply do not depend on it. Feedback becomes information, not instruction. Disapproval becomes data, not danger. Praise becomes noise, not fuel. This is why emotional pressure collapses when validation is removed. Pressure only exists when there is something at stake emotionally. When approval is no longer required, the stakes disappear. And without stakes, manipulation, guilt, urgency, and intimidation lose their grip. This is also why non-neediness changes how people approach you. They speak more carefully. They pause before pushing. They test less aggressively. They hesitate before assuming compliance. Not because you demanded respect, but because your nervous system is no longer offering itself for regulation. People feel when they cannot move you emotionally, and what cannot be moved becomes a reference point. This is the deepest shift of all. You stop trying to manage perception. You stop rehearsing responses. You stop preemptively defending yourself. You become still, internally. From that stillness, decisions become cleaner. You respond when it makes sense, not when pressure demands it. You speak when there is value, not when silence feels uncomfortable. You disagree without hostility. You agree without surrender. This is not emotional coldness. It is emotional ownership. You still feel fear. You still feel desire. You still feel tension. But none of it escapes you without permission. That permission is power. This is why freedom does not come from being liked. It comes from no longer needing to be. And this leads directly to the governing psychological law of this stage. Freedom begins when validation is no longer required. Once validation stops regulating you, everything else reorganizes naturally. Your presence, your authority, your relationships, and your power. Not because you demanded it, but because you stopped giving it away. If this is hitting something real, tap like and hit subscribe. Because most people don't lose power in big moments. They lose it in small ones. Over-explaining, over-apologizing, over-agreeing, bending just to keep the room comfortable. That's not humility. That's training people to manage you. And the moment you stop seeking approval, something subtle but irreversible happens in the social environment around you. You don't announce it. You don't explain it. You don't correct anyone. Yet people begin to behave differently almost immediately. Not because they consciously notice a change, but because their nervous systems register it. People speak differently to those who don't seek approval. Their tone becomes more careful. Their words become more deliberate. They pause more often. They test less casually. Conversations slow down around you, not because you dominate them, but because you no longer rush to accommodate them. When someone is no longer trying to be liked, the usual social shortcuts stop working. Flattery loses effectiveness. Guilt lands flat. Urgency feels awkward. Jokes meant to lower status don't get traction. Approval seeking creates speed. Non-neediness creates gravity. This is why testing, disrespect, and manipulation decrease so noticeably. Tests only work when someone is invested in passing them. Disrespect only escalates when it provokes reaction. Manipulation only functions when there is emotional access. The moment you stop adjusting yourself to be accepted, all three lose their incentive structure. People test to see what they can move. When nothing moves, testing becomes pointless. This is also why reactions around you begin to split. Some people retreat. These are usually the ones who benefited from your previous need to please. The ones who enjoyed the leverage of your availability. The ones who relied on your explanations, your flexibility, your emotional labor. When approval is no longer offered freely, they experience it as loss, not of you, but of control. Their withdrawal is not confusion, it is recognition. Others respect you more. These are the ones who value clarity, stability, and self-command. They don't need you to perform warmth or seek reassurance. They respond to grounded presence instinctively. With them, conversations become simpler. Boundaries feel cleaner. Mutual respect replaces emotional negotiation. This is approval withdrawal acting as a natural filter. When you stop seeking approval, you don't become isolated. You become selective without trying. The social environment reorganizes itself. Some connections fall away because they were built on emotional compliance. Others strengthen because they were waiting for you to stop bending. This is where many people panic, because they mistake fewer emotional hooks for fewer relationships. But what's actually happening is refinement. Noise drops, signal sharpens, and here's the part most people don't expect. Authority begins to form without confrontation. You don't need to assert yourself more. You don't need to correct people aggressively. You don't need to stand up for yourself theatrically. Authority emerges because you no longer participate in the approval economy. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop defending your position. You stop performing likability as a strategy. When someone challenges you, your response is slower or absent. When someone pressures you, you don't rush to explain. When someone disapproves, you don't scramble to repair it. That stillness does the work for you. People instinctively adjust their behavior around those who don't adjust themselves. This is not intimidation, it's calibration. Humans constantly calibrate social hierarchy through microsignals, tone, timing, eye contact, reaction speed, posture, and emotional leakage. Approval-seeking floods these channels. Grounded presence closes them. This is why grounded presence replaces performance so completely. Performance requires effort. It requires monitoring reactions, tracking approval, and managing impressions. Presence requires none of that. Presence is what remains when you stop trying to be received a certain way. And because it is effortless, it is trusted. Effort signals desire. Desire signals dependency. Dependency invites leverage. When effort disappears, leverage evaporates with it. You'll notice interruptions drop. People wait for you to finish speaking. They don't talk over you as easily. They hesitate before making demands. They explain themselves more clearly to you, not because you asked, but because your stillness invites precision. This is the quiet reversal most people never learn how to trigger. You are no longer chasing respect. Respect reorganizes itself around you. And importantly, this does not make you cold, distant, or detached. It makes you centered. You still engage. You still listen. You still care. But your care is no longer transactional. It is no longer offered to secure acceptance. That distinction changes everything. This is why authority forms without conflict. Conflict requires friction. Friction requires opposing movement. When you stop moving toward approval, there is nothing to push against. Resistance dissolves before it becomes visible. People either rise to meet your groundedness, or they quietly step away. And both outcomes are victories. This is the lived integration of the psychological law governing this stage. The world adjusts to those who no longer adjust to it, not through force, not through dominance displays, not through explanation or correction, but through the quiet, unmistakable signal of someone who no longer needs permission to exist as they are. This is when everything changes. Not because you demanded it, but because you finally stopped asking. There is a moment, quiet, internal, and irreversible, when approval stops being necessary. Not because you convinced yourself you don't care, but because something deeper takes over. You no longer reach for validation. You no longer brace for rejection. You no longer shape yourself to fit the emotional expectations of the room. This is the shift from pleasing to embodying. Pleasing is outward-facing. It asks, how am I being received? Embodying is inward-anchored. It asks, am I aligned? Once that shift occurs, your behavior changes without effort. You don't try to be confident. You don't rehearse responses. You don't scan faces for reassurance. You move from a stable internal reference point instead of a fluctuating external one. That is what it means to be self-anchored. A self-anchored person does not need agreement to proceed. They do not require approval to decide. They do not dissolve under disapproval. Their nervous system is no longer outsourced to other people's reactions. Because of this, their presence becomes heavier, calmer, and harder to ignore. Let's lock this identity by revisiting the laws that brought you here. Approval-seeking hands power outward. Non-neediness pulls power inward. Seeking approval places others in the judge position. Self-anchoring removes the courtroom entirely. Approval hunger creates speed, explanation over agreement, and self-betrayal. Self-command creates pause, precision, and restraint. When approval stops being necessary, authority stops being negotiated. This is why self-anchored people walk differently, not dramatically, subtly. Their movements are unhurried. Their posture is settled. They don't rush through space as if apologizing for existing in it. They take up exactly the amount of space they need, no more, no less. and that alone signals internal ownership. They pause before responding, not because they are unsure, but because they don't feel pressured to fill silence. Silence is no longer a threat to them. It's a tool. They let moments breathe. They let others reveal intent. They let urgency expire on its own. They speak less, but when they do, their words land. Not because the words are clever, but because they aren't padded with need. There is no invisible plea attached, no desire to be liked hiding inside the sentence. What is said stands on its own, and just as important, they decide cleanly. Self-anchored people don't over-explain decisions. They don't justify boundaries emotionally. They don't soften clarity to avoid disappointment. They state, they choose, they move. If someone disagrees, they don't collapse. If someone disapproves, they don't scramble. They understand something most people never learn. Disapproval is not dangerous. Misalignment is. Approval is replaced by self-command and clarity. This does not make you rigid. It makes you honest with yourself first. You still adapt. But you adapt from choice, not fear. You still cooperate, but you don't contort. You still care, but you don't leak control. This is why power begins to follow you instead of the other way around. Power is attracted to stability. Stability comes from internal alignment. Internal alignment cannot exist where approval is required. People feel this before they understand it. They sense when someone is no longer chasing social permission. Conversations with you feel different. There is less emotional bargaining, less subtle dominance play, less pressure to manage you. You are no longer trying to be impressive. You are no longer trying to be safe. You are simply there. And that is what changes the hierarchy. Because hierarchies don't form around confidence displays or moral claims. They form around who needs whom less. The one who does not need approval becomes the reference point others orient around. This is why power doesn't need to be chased once you're self-anchored. Chasing implies distance. Anchoring implies arrival. And finally, understand this clearly. Because it completes the transformation. Being self-anchored does not mean you never seek feedback. It means feedback no longer defines you. It does not mean you never care what people think. It means their thinking no longer commands your behavior. It does not mean you are immune to emotion. It means emotion no longer overrides your direction. This is the identity that cannot be shaken by praise or punishment. The one that doesn't escalate, explain, or perform. The one that doesn't need to announce authority because it is already assumed. Lock this in. You are no longer someone trying to be accepted. You are someone who is internally aligned and lets the world respond. And this is the final law that governs everything you've learned. Authority begins the moment approval stops being necessary. This is the dark psychology protocol lock-in. Not dominance through force, not control through manipulation, but power through self-command. Quiet, grounded, and permanent. If this helped you see the chain clearly, tap like and hit subscribe. And comment this: I don't audition for respect. Because the law is simple. The one who needs approval gives power to the one who grants it. And the moment you stop seeking it, your authority comes back, quietly, permanently.